You're listening to the Crochet Conversations podcast.
Hello guys, welcome back to another episode. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday, everybody. Hi.
So today we're going to talk about something that I'm sure would interest a bunch of you. There are a few people on our Instagram, a few of you, you know how sometimes you recognize their usernames, like our regular ones?
Yeah.
So I noticed that every time I post a picture of my studio or of my yarn, or I talk about my yarn and, you know, all the 1,000,001 balls that I have, I've noticed this same few usernames that constantly ask about how I store them, if I have any tips on storing yarn organization and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think people in general just really like your yarn. Every time you have something to say about yarn, they just get overly excited or crazy about it.
Yeah, so initially this was going to be a quick questions episode, but the more notes I wrote, the more I realized that no, this cannot be covered in just a quick questions. So I think if any of you have listened to our was it Class 95, our interview with Muttons in the Morning, was that Class 95?
I think it's 97. Is it 97?
I don't remember. Okay, I'm so sorry.
I think it's 97.
Basically, our radio interview, one of them asked how many balls of yarn I have, and I answered that I think it's numbering in the thousands, and it's, you know, I think it's just grown a little bit since then. So just a little bit,
not a little bit.
So I thought that this would be a perfect opportunity to talk about how I organize my yarn, and some tips on how you can store them safely. I mean, safely as in, you know,
so it doesn't go
keeping
bad.
them organized and, you know, prolonging its shelf life.
Yeah.
Because I think that it can get very overwhelming very quickly, especially if you have a lot of yarn.
When you start accumulating them, right?
Yeah, because there are so many different subcategories of yarn in general. So today let's talk about organizing all the yarn that you have in general.
Okay.
Or specifically how I organize my yarn, and then plus some tips for you guys. So many moons ago, many years ago,
when you first started collecting yarn?
No, when we first started the business.
Yeah.
All of my yarn could be kept in just 2 boxes. Do you remember those days?
Yes, I do remember.
It was much simpler, much less complicated.
Simpler times.
So all of my yarn could be stored in 2 plastic boxes. It's one of those typical Toyoga boxes that's like maybe 40 by 60 cm. Those 2 stackable boxes. And basically how I organize it was just one box is solid color, the other box is variegated.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think it's also because it really depends on where we were staying at the time as well. Yeah, so boxes just make a lot more sense.
And also keep in mind that at that time we were living in a very small studio apartment. There was probably only 400 square feet. So it was very, very tiny, and it was just the 2 of us.
Yeah.
And our pet. So basically my office was the 2 Toyoga boxes. When I'm working, I would work on top of the Toyoga boxes, and I'll sit on the sofa. So life was very simple. It didn't matter the material, it didn't matter the yarn weight. As long as it was variegated, it goes in the variegated box.
Yeah.
As long as it's, you know, solid colors, it goes in the solid color boxes.
Yeah.
Much later on, I think we did this for about 2 years or so.
Yeah.
That we started accumulating a little bit more boxes.
Yeah.
And it became apparent at some point that I can no longer keep buying boxes
and stacking them
in a 400 square feet studio apartment. So we made the decision to move and get a bigger place with 2 bedrooms, and we converted one of the rooms into a studio, a working studio.
Yeah, for you to use,
Yeah, and that's when things really got out of hand.
I guess in a good way, not entirely in a bad way.
It's not in a bad way.
Yeah.
I mean, more yarn it's never a bad thing. If you've listened to our all about yarn episode, one of the first few episodes, you know that I have this love affair. Buying yarn is a whole other hobby separate from crochet.
Yeah, there's just so much things about yarn that you cannot. It's not as easy to just put it into like 4 boxes.
Yeah, it's
and
not.
You know, that's not how you can categorize it properly, especially for us when we're doing it as a business. You know.
Yeah, so So now that we've moved into this studio space, and if any of you have taken our classes with us, you know you've been to this class, this room where I teach my classes. And when we first moved in, so basically all my yarn is stored in IKEA shelves. We have the Billy bookcases as well as the Kallax, the cubbies, and basically 2 walls of this room is lined with this cabinets or like cubbies, so to speak. So you know how when you have a new place and you first move in, you want things to look like picture perfect, like Instagram worthy. So I started organizing my yarn by colors. So it didn't matter the yarn weight or the material, as long as it was red, it goes in the red cubby. And I sort of made like a rainbow assortment, and it looked so pretty. It was so Instagram worthy, but that's because, you know, it's a new place. So after a while, I started to realize that it's just...
This doesn't really work, right?
It's not practical, So we had to adjust. And the reason why I did that was because initially I also didn't have not too many balls of yarn. I mean, keep in mind that this is 2 or 3 Toyogo boxes now being transferred into a shelf.
So you basically have a room now.
A whole room,
to store your yarn.
So, you know, putting 5 or 6 balls of yarn in one cubby and color coordinating them was not a problem because I could easily see what I had at one glance.
And also, I guess at the beginning where we started buying yarn for the business, we didn't have that many different types also.
We didn't.
So it wasn't that difficult for you to, let's say, pick out or differentiate all the rates, from what you needed.
And also at that time I was working with a lot of acrylics still.
Correct.
I hadn't really converted into almost like cotton entirely. And then I realized at one point that this was not going to work. And I basically it started accumulating, and then my red yarn started stacking, and then because I started buying cotton, you know how cotton comes in a lot smaller quantity, so there are smaller balls compared to acrylic. So I started stacking them, and they started falling behind, and it came to a point where I just couldn't see what I had.
I think that was the main problem.
So we took everything out. You should have seen the floor, man.
But I think that was fun though, reorganizing the whole yarn stash.
I love organizing things. I really do, Maybe it's one of those, like, when you have your own place, you just want to organize and make things look nice. So we did that. We took everything out. We basically tore the whole room apart. We rearranged some furniture, and I decided at that point that I'm going to forgo the Instagram worthy look and start to organize them by type and by weight. And I think that this is really a system that works for me, and it's a system that I now recommend to anybody. If you have yarn, I would really, really, really recommend you store via material and weight in that order. Don't put all your same cotton together if they're different yarn weight. So if they're lace weight versus DK, don't put them together. Put all your cotton, maybe like, okay, let's break this down a little bit, okay? So for me, I have what do I have? I have acrylic, I have cotton, and I have blends. Right? So basically I have one entire shelf that is all acrylic, and I store all my acrylic shelving, acrylic yarn in that shelving via color, weight, and then type.
Yes, correct.
Right, and I also put them in quantity also. So large quantities go in one cubby, the smaller quantities go in a bucket in one of the shelf, of the shelves. Basically, if I buy more acrylic yarn, they all go into that same one shelving. And then the rest of the shelving is cotton, and cotton is the most complicated. I have cotton DK plain, and then another cubby that's cotton DK variegated, and then another cubby that's like cotton acrylic blend and solid color, cotton acrylic blend,
I think
variegated.
Because recently especially you're starting to bring in a lot more cotton to work with,
Yeah, I think in the past 2 years or so, I've started converting from acrylic to cotton. And I just prefer the look and feel of cotton a lot more. So that's what I'm doing. And I also have and I'm also now starting to work outside of that. So I would bring in like really novelty type yarn, like plastic yarn, like rope yarn or paper yarn. And I really enjoy working with this like unique type of yarn. And then I have a cubby for that as well.
All the special different types, right?
I also have a cubby for, let me look around. like super chunky ones.
Oh, yeah.
And super fine ones, like lace weight ones. And I think that in general, the reason why I say this works is because if you are, say, going to make a scarf, for example, there's a higher chance that you would switch colors, and you would never switch yarn weight or material.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
want to keep that scarf all working in the same material, just different colors or
Yeah,
different.
and we did talk about the importance of using the same type, the same material, and the same weight.
Yeah, in a
type of
previous
yarn,
episode we talked about that. So I just think it works better because at one glance you can see all the different colors you have in that same, and you know that everything within this section or this cubby can sort of work together and interchange the yarn you use, as long as it's all in the same yarn.
Yeah, correct.
You're not looking at the red section and then seeing acrylic and knowing that, oh, I can't use this, I can't use this, I can't use this, and
Yeah,
then
correct.
it starts getting very overwhelming very quickly.
Yeah, and-
so the
yeah.
problem with sorting it by color and not by material then weight is that when I needed to make, say, like a handphone case or
Yeah.
a pouch that required multiple color changes, I am pulling yarn from every corner
Yeah, you're
of the
trying to
room.
dig and to see what you have. Yeah.
And it's so tedious and time consuming, especially when we started getting lots and lots of custom orders, like commission pieces from customers. And then having to take pictures and send it to them was such a tedious process because, I could pick a blue from here and then I have to walk across the entire room and pick a red from there.
Yeah,
but
it's all
why?
coming from like different places. Yeah.
Yeah, and it didn't make any sense. They're all, they're all the same material, but why shouldn't I put them together? So after the reorganization of the studio, that's what we did. So right now my yarn is organized in this way: material, then weight.
Yeah.
And I think it works wonderfully. Finding yarn is such a breeze now. If I know I want to do a project, I just pull out this one cubby and everything I need will be in that one cubby.
I think also similar to what you said about the separating the smaller quantity yarn with the bigger,
large
the larger
quantity.
one. So
Yeah.
if you know that this project, for example, needs a lot more of yarn of that
Yeah,
color.
and then you can keep
you know,
stock also,
yeah,
like inventory,
you
how
know
much
that
you have.
Yeah, you have that color. You can actually use this to make this project, for example.
Yeah. Another thing is my process when I buy yarn. Let me share a little bit about what happens when I purchase yarn and finally bring it home. So the first thing I do when I bring yarn back from the store is to always turn it into a ball or a cake. And I talked about this also in a previous episode. Do you remember what it was? I don't really remember. But I know I
think
talked
tools,
about it.
I think. Were we talking about the tools?
I don't remember. But basically, the reason I turn it into a ball or a cake is to firstly assess the color and check the yarn. I always do this, even if it's like a brand new right off the package. It's not a mill-end pack. I always turn it into a ball or turn it into a cake. Then I sort of assess, do I have a lot of it or don't I? If it's just one or two balls, then I find the corresponding material cubby and then I place it there.
Yeah, I think I also remember you mentioning that with this, especially if you buy like variegated ones or the different section of colors one, when you wind it up, you get to see it also, like how it looks like, right, before you start on the project.
Especially if you're buying like a color changing yarn or cake, if you keep everything in one section and you wind it up and you get to assess the colors and see everything, you know what you're lacking in there. Because you may feel like you have a lot of yarn, but when it comes down to it, if you want to make a scarf, actually you don't really have that much of that same one material. So that's kind of like another benefit of keeping all the same material of yarn together. The next thing is, if I know that I'm not using this yarn anytime soon, if I know that I'm just buying this yarn because it looks pretty and I don't intend to, do anything with it yet, or I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, I always re-skein it and keep it in a skein. So I have a yarn swift, so I would unravel the ball, put it around the yarn swift, and then twist it into like a twisted skein, and that's how I store my yarn. So I have one section in my cabinet as my shelving as well. I have one section that's entirely just twisted skeins, and the reason you want to twist your skein or you want to re-skein your yarn is because it keeps its elasticity.
Yeah.
Especially if not using anytime soon. Sometimes when you buy a cake from the store, it can be, the tension is already slightly tighter.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is to keep it all in one nice thing during transport and all that, so that it reaches you in one nice ball, right? But when you want to store it like that, if you keep it
for long, right?
For long, yeah, in a ball or in a cake, for example, over time it's going to lose its elasticity. It's going to overstretch because the yarn is twisted around each other so tightly.
How long is long?
Maybe like a year or so.
Okay.
If you know you're not going to use it for a year, it's better if you do that. Okay, of course, is if you have the luxury of space.
Yeah.
If you have the luxury to afford a Reskyner or a Yarn Swift. And I'm aware that this is me being slightly obsessive with how I keep my yarn, but I think that it's really the best option for you, which is why yarn is sold to you. Real proper yarn is sold to you in skeins, because it's how it keeps its shape or its quality for longer.
Yeah.
Another thing is that there are no tails with skeins. There are no tails sticking out. There are no loose bits that could unravel or pull from the thread.
Yeah.
Right, because both the end of the tails are tied up together and then twisted. So it keeps everything really nice and compact.
Yeah, it makes sense. For storage purpose.
For storage, and it stacks so nicely, and it's so Instagram worthy. it looks, it's so Pinterest worthy, to have a shelving full of little skein butts.
I mean, for me, I would think that if I turn it into a cake, it's just easier for me to use.
Right, yeah. So if you're going to use it soon, within the next couple of months, then it makes sense just to leave it the way it is. But if you're going to keep it, so for example, the reason why our House of Yarn, our Pima Cotton House of Yarn brand is stored and sold to you in skeins is because I don't know how long I'm going to be keeping this yarn for. If no one finishes my supply of yarn within the next a year or 2 years, I don't want to keep it in a ball where it could sort of compromise its quality by the time it gets to you, maybe in like a year from now.
Yeah, correct.
So that's also one reason. If you buy from the store and your ball already comes in like a bullet skein, then actually feel free to just leave it the way it is. So do you know what a bullet skein is?
No, I was about to ask you what a bullet skein is.
So 90% of the yarn sold in Spotlight, for example, is a bullet skein. So if you just imagine what a skein looks like, it's like slightly oval, and the label is always wrapped around the middle section of the ball.
Yep.
So it's kind of like a ball, but elongated. It's not really that donut shape, so that's a bullet skein.
Okay.
So most yarn would come to you, or if you buy yarn from a store, most of them, at least 80 to 90% of them, would be sold in a bullet skein. In that case, then feel free to just leave it the way it is, because I think
that way is fine as well.
Okay. Yeah. So that's my process. That's how I organize my yarn, and that's what I do when I buy new yarn. So not everybody has the luxury of having a whole room.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
to store yarn, only for yarn. So let's talk now about some tips for keeping your yarn organized and to prolong the quality and, to keep the shelf life of your yarn in tip-top condition. Okay, the first tip that I have, and I think that's the most important tip, is to keep it away from the sun.
If you have direct sunlight.
Yeah, no direct sunlight at all. If you have a very sunny window and you want to keep your yarn near it, please make sure that either you have a curtain or you put it in a tinted box that it's not directly in the sun, because any dyed fabric, put it in the sun long enough and the color is going to fade. And especially if you are paying attention to dye lots, you don't want to buy yarn from the same dye lot, put it in the sun, and have one side
different color from the other side.
The other side, and then that would sort of mess up with your dye lot numbers as well, because there's already this added factor that not all yarn from different dye lots would be the same, right?
Is this like direct sunlight for like a long period of time?
I think 1 or 2 months, it's maybe fine. Maybe that's fine. But if you're going to keep it that way for long, I think maybe 6 months and above, then keep it away.
Not such a good idea.
Also because you don't want the heat to mess up the quality of the yarn also. So especially in Singapore, when it's so hot and humid, this leads me to my number 2 tip. If you're keeping in a box, like us, in a Toyogo box, what I used to do was to put little dry... What's the thing? Like the moisture sachets.
Yeah.
The silicone sachet, the silicone beads thingy, and keep it around.
Sort of to absorb the moisture, is it?
Just to absorb whatever residual moisture there is in the air when you close it up.
Yeah.
That way, your yarn doesn't get smelly, it doesn't get moldy, because if there's any bit of moisture that's trapped in an airtight box or in a box in general, it could potentially cause mold to grow on your yarn, because it's still fabric.
Yeah, at the end of the day, yeah.
At the end of the day, it's still fabric. You still could get, if you're prone to having like, you know how people put like those mothballs in the cabinet?
Yes, in the cabinet, yeah.
If your cabinet or your house or your wardrobe or whatever it is prone to having those, your yarn is fair game for it, because it's also fabric. But, do not put those Hungry Hippo boxes. You know, those Hungry Hippo, the pink ones, with the silicone beads, and then it absorbs the moisture water, and it becomes water. Do not put that into your box. If you're storing it in like a Toyogo box, do not put that in, because firstly, if anything goes wrong and it spills,
okay, like worst case scenario,
you cannot get it out of your yarn. Okay, it's also not safe for you to put your yarn in the washing machine and wash it. You're just gonna come out with a tangled spaghetti mess, right?
Of course not.
And especially if you're working with natural fibers like wool or cotton, putting those Hungry Hippo like dehumidifier thingies in the boxes would absorb too much moisture from your yarn and cause your yarn to be extremely dry and brittle. And the downside of that is that it could lint over time, or the fibers could break easily over time. And you know, it would be fine maybe 1 or 2 years from now, but 3, 4, 5 years down the road, especially if you're going to make yourself a top or a scarf that you know is going to get, you know, high usage, you don't want your natural fibers to be breaking, and that could cause, you know, your work to tear. Or if you are tying knots, you know, in your yarn, you don't want the knot to break and everything unravels because there's not enough moisture in your yarn. This is very similar to you know, they say never put your leather handbags or leather goods in a place that is overly dry, because you will suck up all the moisture and cause the leather to crack. This is similar in that sense.
So you don't want to purposely put something inside that would take away all the moisture as well.
You don't want to take away too much moisture. So those little moisture packets work fine because they're so small, and all it does really is just to make sure that there's no residual like water droplets in the air. But a Hungry Hippo type box would really suck up everything and keep it really dry, which works well if you're storing it with like you know, like camera tools where you want it to be extremely dry, you know, but not for yarn, because don't forget, yarn needs sort of moisture for it to be pliable and stretchy a little bit.
But I guess like if it's an ongoing thing, like I'm constantly like, you know, opening my box every day or every, you know, once a week and still using it, it should be fine, right? I
mean, if you're using opening your box, I'm assuming that box gets a lot of movement, and if it collects, you know, if the little silicone beads collects enough water and it spills, you know, you want to also avoid that entirely. So that's tip number 2. I hope that was not too heavy. So tip number 3 is keep all your labels.
Like my yarn material,
your yarn labels.
Okay.
So now this is speaking from personal experience. I hate the look of labels. When I store my yarn, I throw away all the labels. Initially,
I always ask you, how do you remember, or what like you know, what this material is? Yeah,
and when I had like 20-30 balls of yarn, fine, I could sort of remember them all. But now that I have 1,000 over, there's no way, and I'm starting to realize that the things I make are very large, large. They require a lot of yarn, like 400, 500, 600 grams of yarn. And if I'm gonna wash them, I need to know what the material is. And the problem with me is that after I throw away the label, then I use the yarn, and then once it's in my wardrobe hanging for like a year, I forget what material it's made of. You know, I can sort of guess, obviously, just by touching it, that this is a natural fiber or not, but I don't remember if it's pure wool or if it's like 95% wool.
And most of the time it's not, right? It's always a mixture of something.
It could be, but if in the chance it is 100% wool and it shrinks, I'm going to be so heartbroken. You know, in a previous episode, I talked about someone washing the yarn, you know, the scarf, and it entirely disintegrated. That's what happens when you don't keep the label or you don't know what the label is. So I have decided to put my vanity aside and to just always keep the label. Or if you want to throw away the label, if you don't want it with your yarn, you can always file them up or take a photo of them or write it down. You need to at least know what dye lot it is, what the swatch gauge, the recommended size hook it is. You need to at least know the material makeup, if in case you want to wash it or you want to write it down, or if you need to write a pattern for somebody.
Yeah, it basically is still a good idea to keep it. Yeah.
And also the brand. You know, you could get 2 solid color, say red cotton DK from 2 separate brands, and they could feel a little bit different. You know, and if you want to make, you know, maybe like a top or a scarf that requires more than 1 balls of yarn, you want to keep it in the same brand family.
Yeah, I think that's my problem. Like I finish up my yarn already and I want to buy some more, right?
Yeah, and then you don't know.
Yeah, if I don't know, how am I going to find the same one? Yeah,
exactly. So I think all that is very important. So if you don't want to keep the label, at least write it down. Tip number 4, I think you mentioned it already earlier. It's about keeping all those large quantities of yarn together.
Okay.
So what I like to do is I like to buy those extra large Ziploc bags, and I would put in all the duplicate balls of yarn into that Ziploc bag.
Like from the same lot?
From the same lot, from the same everything. Basically, if I go to the store, I see a yarn that I like, I buy 5-6 balls at once. They're all coming home and going to live inside a little nice clear Ziploc bag. Sometimes I will label the bag if I know what I'm going to do with it. I will label, okay, this is for, you know, this is this, I need this much yarn and everything. And I would put the pattern in that same Ziploc. But sometimes I don't do that, especially if I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But at least if I know that I want to make a top, I immediately go to the area in my room or my studio that I keep all of these large quantity Ziploc bags together, so I know what I have at one glance, and I'm not busy, you know, if I want to make a scarf, I'm not going to look into the cubby and pulling up balls of yarn and manually counting them. All that is done the moment I come home from the store.
Yeah, I read somewhere they said, you know, about not storing your yarn in packaging and all that, and it should be kept in like open airy area.
Yeah, with
like
good, you know, airflow and whatever.
So like you keeping it in Ziploc, you know, isn't that like also sort of considered as packaging?
I think for me, at least I found, because we are here,
like
because we are in Singapore, and it's so humid, and humid plus heat, I think it would do more damage to my yarn, honestly, if I don't put them in the Ziploc. Of course, if you're going to put them in an airtight anything, remember to always put in those little dry sachet packet. I don't know what they're called, but, you know, put them inside the Ziploc and label them, and don't store them in it for years and years and years, of course. So I haven't had any bad experiences, honestly, with my yarn fraying or anything.
I think also because we use it like
I
quickly,
use my yarn often, and I'm assuming that if you're listening to this, you are somebody who actively crochets and would actively sort through your yarn. So I don't think this is the problem. If you are going to keep it, I don't know, I want to say if you want to keep yarn for a long time, but how long is long really? Like generations? No, right? So I think that you're
not.
fine.
If you're going to keep it for so long and not use it, please donate it to Crooked Crochet.
Me, yeah. As long as you're not putting your yarn in a airtight place under the sun and heat, you know,
there should be no problem.
I think that you'll be fine, honestly. Okay, tip number 5. If you have any small quantity balls, or like single color balls, or like scraps, or like half-used balls of yarn, put them all into one bucket and put them on the shelf. I think that really is the easiest way to deal with it, because
as in like keep all those
small
mini
quantities together, because once you accumulate enough of these small balls, you could probably do something with it. Yeah. And it doesn't matter whether it's a different yarn weight or not. If you have like scrap yarn left over, putting them all into one, you know, you could make like tapestry crochet with it. You could you could donate them to me. No, I'm just kidding. You could what's that thing? Weaving. You could weave them into some sort of fabric.
Yeah, we do have so many large jar of all our scrap yarn.
I mean, you say large, but maybe you should define exactly how large it is. It's really, really huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
I think it comes up to like
my waist. your waist.
Your waist, because you're
yeah.
taller than me, but yeah, it's really huge. And yeah, keep all your small balls together so that you can see, and honestly, it's not going to tangle, it's not going to make a mess. The thing I hate the most, honestly, is tangled yarn. It's different, semi untwisted together
I've
yarn
become
balls.
so patient, like a patient person now from
because of all the yarn that tangles.
Yeah.
So keep all your smaller balls of yarn into one,
Yeah.
basket or whatever, and just keep it aside. I think that really is the best tip to making things organized. Also, this is my goal here is to keep things organized, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the best way. And my final tip is to keep it away from dust. Don't let it get dusty.
So that's so hard.
I mean, have a cover. I mean,
Okay.
if you don't want it to be an airtight, you can have one of those, fabric baskets with a cover, as long as it's not somewhere that it's going to collect dust, like at the top of a shelf. So I have, I've had to throw away 1 or 2 balls in the past because I've kept them on in a basket on the top of a shelf that I just don't touch for a year. And, when you don't touch things for a year, they're bound to get dusty.
Yeah,
and
I don't touch something for like a week and it gets dusty already.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. And it's very similar to trying to get the dust out of like a fabric or carpet. If you've ever had a dusty carpet and you had to beat the shit out of it to get the dust out, you know how difficult it is. Once dust gets into fabric, it's almost impossible to get it out entirely.
It's too difficult, yeah.
You can't even wash it to get it out entirely. It would just lint up, and then you have a very linty piece of fabric.
Yeah.
So yarn is very similar to that as well. And I do, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if this is entirely accurate, but I feel like dust is a little bit corrosive. For example, the yarn ball that I had to throw away, the parts that had that had dust, when I tried to wipe it away, some of the fibers actually broke.
Really?
Yeah, and so I think that it's sort of
I guess
away
if it remains
at the
there
if it
long
remains,
long enough, right?
Yeah, that's how I feel. So keep it away from dust, and you obviously don't want dusty. You don't want dusty yarn.
Yeah,
it
and
also does change the color. And it's going to cause you all sorts of allergies, and it's
Yeah, I think it's the allergy part that
gets to us the most.
That's like the problem.
So yeah, those are my tips for how to keep your yarn organized.
Maybe we can talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of us keeping our yarn in containers, like the plastic containers.
Containers versus shelf.
Yeah, correct.
Pros and cons. Do you have any?
I guess previously, because we were living in a small space, containers felt
more compact, I think.
More compact, and plus I can stack them.
Yeah.
So it makes sense in terms of like space wise, more space efficient.
As long as you have more than 2 containers, I think stacking them is not a very efficient way, because you're gonna have to unstack a lot of boxes to get to the one right at the bottom.
I mean that's the con lah.
Yeah. I think the pro of keeping yarn in big boxes is that everything is contained. It's so self-contained. You don't have to worry. Everything you want is in that box. You open that lid and it's like Wonderland. You know, everything is there for you.
Yeah.
I think that's the pro of it. The con is that you can only keep so many balls of yarn.
I mean, eventually if you start accumulating more, then obviously that's not that much of a
it's not such a solution.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another suggestion. Instead of keeping in boxes, I think another good way to keep them in, especially if you're living in a smaller space, like I said earlier, not everybody has the luxury of an entire room just for yarn. If you are keeping yarn in, say, like your bedroom, get one of those plastic what would you call it, the
tray?
plastic containers, like drawers.
Okay.
There's like 2 or 3 tiers. You can buy those from Popular or Toyogo, for example, and just label them, like the first layer is maybe cotton acrylic, for example, the second one is 100% cotton, then 100% acrylic, and whatever, and just have little small shelving like that, and then just label them and keep all of your yarn in there. I think it's good enough. It's covered, it's not entirely airtight, so you can get your precious airflow.
Yeah.
You can separate them, they can be labeled. You can
still get like dividers and sort of.
Yeah, you can get dividers, put them in. One layer could be entirely for your tools or whatever. So I think that's a good option as well. For shelvings, I think the plus side is just that you can see everything.
Yeah.
It's easy access. You can see what you have. But it's really not practical if you don't
have space.
If you don't have a space dedicated to... And also, shelving takes up physical floor space in a room, especially if you're working in your bedroom or you share, you live in a shared apartment that you don't have that luxury of space. Then shelving really is only if you're luxury, if you have the luxury.
And I guess it's also more expensive, right?
It's definitely more expensive.
I think for us as a business, in terms of look, it looks better also because you have people coming to the studio. They can see the yarn also, and we do sell yarn out in yarn.
And it's also very easy for me to teach now because when I'm teaching my crochet classes, part of the lesson is material and conservation as well, like understanding your material.
Yeah.
And when they're here in the studio with me, it's so easy for me to just go, and if I'm talking about like a blend versus 100% acrylic, I know exactly where I'm going to go to pull it out and give them, an overview of this is a cotton acrylic blend, as well as all the different colors and types, and like whether it's color changing or variegated, and all the different types of colors you can get it in. It's so easy for me to teach now that everything is sort of has
visible,
its place. And if I want to show the difference between wool and acrylic, I can easily pull out one whole cubby and show, give it to them then. I'm not digging through what
or like pulling out all the drawers and all that.
Yeah, in the past I used to think, okay, if I want to show you what wool is, what colors do I have wool in? Oh, I think I have it in red. Okay, let me go to the red section and look. Oh shit, it's not in here. Maybe I have it in blue. Let's go to the blue section, you know. And so it's so not practical after a while.
So I guess like for us as a business, it makes more sense to be in shelvings. But for, let's say, my own personal stash, I can just have it in the drawers and that should be fine.
Honestly, if you're talking about organization, whatever works for you, as long as you know how to care for the individual yarn ball itself, it's not really an issue where you store it.
Or how you store it.
You can put them in boxes on a shelf.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
As long as you keep them away from the sun, you keep it away from the dust, you keep the labels, and you organize it by material, then weight.
Then weight, yes.
It's the one thing that I'm going to insist, is that you store it with all the same material together and then subcategory that by weight. If you don't have that many, then of course just keep all your wool together, or keep all your cotton, or keep all your acrylic together. It doesn't matter. But if you start having more than 10 balls of yarn in different like sub weights in the same material, then I think you should really separate them.
Okay, great. This is like really good tips, for anybody who has
wants to know how to organize and keep them safe. I keep saying safe. Maybe just safe just means that it keeps them with me.
It makes you feel safe.
It makes me feel safe. Yeah, that's right. So we've come to the end of this episode again. This was a really fun episode.
Yeah, it's really our journey from like having 10 balls to 1,000 balls.
Yeah, it's probably
now.
2,000 now. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to submit them to us via Instagram or Facebook. We are at Crooked Crochet SG, or you can text us on WhatsApp at 912-72743, or email us again, crookedcrochetsg@gmail.com, and check back every Sunday. New episodes get released at 12 noon. And with that, we'll see you in the next one.
Bye guys.
Bye-bye.